right, we're here with Ron, our buddy Ron. He is the owner of Just Books. And if you want to go somewhere to purchase a book, you definitely should come here where everything is, how much, Ron?
2 for $5.
2 for $5. All right, so we're celebrating Black History Month, and we decided to come out here to my favorite bookstore on location. And Ron is probably the most knowledgeable person I've ever met. And I think he's read just about every book in the store except for this gray one here. But I think it's because it's priced at $18.95.
Way out of our league.
All right, so we're going to talk about Black history, but before we do it, I'm going to ask him for the 3 things that were invented that he believes were invented in this area from Springfield. So the first one I'm going to pick up is the Basketball Hall of Fame.
Well, that was the basketball, and you know, we know what basketball is today. It grew to be like a major sport.
Correct. Yes, so basketball. GB airplane?
GB airplanes were made in Springfield. That was one of the pioneers in the aviation industry.
Okay, and then the railroad cars.
The railway cars, they were made there on Wasson Avenue Railroad Cars Company.
Yes, correct. All right, so we got you warmed up a little bit. Go ahead.
Yeah, we made a lot of things.
Okay. All right, so which brings me to Black history. So right now we're going to start with 3 facts that Ron really surprised me with that I didn't know. But if you do have some more information after that. So one of the facts that you mentioned in Black history is Anthony Johnson. Who was he?
He was a black slave owner.
The first black slave owner.
The first legal black slave owner.
Okay.
Because originally a lot of the blacks, when they were brought over here as slaves, they worked for 7 years, and then the government would give them a piece of land after the 7-year indentureness, just like they did the Scotch and the Irish and everything, the indentured servants.
Correct.
He was the first one to go to court and have his slave, slave for life instead of the 7-year period.
Nice.
Okay, because the slave was turned free once. The court set him free, told him that the 7 years, he had fulfilled his obligation, and then he appealed it, and then they made him a slave again. And this happened to the guy 2 or 3 times, and I can't remember the slave's name.
Okay.
But Anthony Johnson, when he finally died, his wife lost all of the property.
Okay.
And the children disassociated themselves because they didn't want to be a descendant of a slave owner, because his slaves were all, his children were also black.
Correct.
But because his wife was, considered a foreigner and a woman, they weren't allowed to own property. So they dissolved all of his estate when he died, which was very, very massive.
Okay, so you said that he purchased a slave. Now, was that his wife that he purchased?
No,
Okay.
I don't know. No.
Okay.
His wife, I don't know anything about his wife.
Yeah.
I do know that he owned slaves in 3 or 4 different states. He had massive plantations.
Okay.
And he just vanished off of the face of the earth after he passed away. His wife had leased some of these plantations out, and they refused to honor her lease because they said, she wasn't an immigrant and all of this, and had no rights to property.
Nice.
And other types of things to get the property away from being a black owner.
All right, so you mentioned something I do want to touch on. You said that he went to court. So
Yes.
take me through that process, because that's also part of history that we don't understand, is that the courts
He went
were
to
involved.
court in Virginia.
Okay.
Originally, after a period of time, the slaves became free.
Correct.
Okay, and he was the one that put this to an end, because he was claiming that he bought the person and he owns them for life, not a period of time.
Correct. Okay.
Okay, because originally the English treated him like an indentured servant, like a Scotchman come over and agreed to work for someone for X number of years. And then after this period of time was over, the government would give them a tract of land that was sufficient for them to, raise food to support their families.
Okay. Interesting. All right. The next one, the Nigerian slave trade. Tell us about that.
The Agawam tribe in Nigeria, which is current-day Nigeria, which was, you know, it was a British territory at the time, but the king from that area was capturing all of his neighbors in exchange for guns and selling them to the British.
Okay.
And they went so far as if they saw, you know, a strong person from their own community, they would have what they call a temple cave. An oracle would say, you violated some law, you know, and they would send this guy into the cave to repent. And there was a back entrance, and he'd go into the cave, and the British would capture him and take him and drag him off to the ship because he was stronger than most people and everything.
Wow, of course.
You know, he was, you know, taller, stronger, more fit.
Correct.
And when he disappeared, the oracle would say, well, God took him back to heaven. And that would explain his disappearance.
But what happened to him? Oh,
he ended up being coming
right.
to America as one of the slaves.
Interesting. So, and it's interesting you say that because as black men, I have had several conversations about how could we have possibly gotten Shaquille O'Neal, someone that tall, over to this country. So
they never picked anybody with, you know, they always picked the strongest. You know, they wouldn't just take random people.
Okay.
I mean, you go out to shop for a car, you're not going to take a car that looks like it's ready to die tomorrow.
Correct. And when you say they, who are you referring to?
Any of the slave traders.
Okay.
I mean, they're not going to take, you know, they'll take a pretty woman regardless of her strength or whatever. Mm-hmm. But, you know, as far as a man goes, they're not going to take a guy that's tiny, okay, you know, or slim build, or, you know, I hate to, you know, like you're buying a cow, but I mean, it's kind of rude, but even the blacks did that to themselves.
Right. Okay. And then the third one you said was John Brown and Stephen Douglas. What is the significance of those two gentlemen?
They're both opposite ends of the abolitionist movement. John Brown was very militant. Yep. And Stephen Douglas, or Frederick Douglass.
I'm sorry, did I break down Stephen? I'm sorry, Frederick Douglass.
Frederick Douglass managed to gain his freedom, and he was one of the first black authors. And he's the one that enlightened most of the people in New England as to the terrible things that slaves would endure, because, you know, people never traveled in those days. You know, you would hear rumors and different things, but you never realized the terrible things that were done to the slaves until they were enlightened by people like Stephen Douglas. Yeah. You know, even John Brown, you know, he was a wool salesman from Ohio. Mm-hmm. And he witnessed some of this stuff, but I don't know if he was ever a slave himself or his family was a slave. I know very little. I was just shocked to find out that he also preached on Hancock Street.
Yes.
And Hancock Street used to be free church. I don't know if it was associated, like today, to, you know, St. John's is a congregational church, but I don't know if it had any association with any major churches like Roman Catholic or Episcopal or Baptist or whatever. But it was a free church, and it was one of the very few interracial churches in New England. You know, people would worship there regardless of race, which was very strange for that time.
And so, you know, the movies that we see in the history that we read, the slaves or the blacks were put in the balconies. Was that how? Because I think I went in there one time and there was a balcony there.
I have no idea. I just, you know, it upsets me that there's so little known about it, and it's such a major black historical piece.
It really is.
You know, we have Martin Luther King Church, but I mean, that's, you know, it's historical, but it's nowhere near in comparison to having two of the polar opposites on the same side in the same church preaching to the same people, and having it be biracial for in the 1800s was remarkable.
Yes.
You know, it showed the openness of the society in Springfield would take everybody regardless of their race.
I agree. What else? Tell me some more interesting things about Black history. You have the floor today.
Florence, Northampton. I don't know if you know where Florence is part of.
I do.
Well, there was an abolitionist, I don't remember his name. He bought 500 acres and a cotton mill over there to create jobs for the escaped slaves. And in the original, in the beginning, they ran the factory on the first 3 floors or 2 floors, and on the upper floor or floors, I don't know how many there were, the black families would live. And eventually they become prosperous enough that they started to build houses. And the mill had owned 500 acres of land there. And I don't know if it's exactly 500, but many of the books claim it to be 500. I don't know the exact dimensions.
Yeah.
But they were building homes for the people, like that had the longest time in the factory, and the newcomers would move into where they moved out of. So it was a prosperous mixed race community, which is strange for the time. It was all abolitionists.
Mm-hmm.
And then because cotton was fueling the demand for slavery, at one point there was somebody that started a silk mill in Northampton, and they were trying to raise silk to get people away from cotton because it would eliminate the need for slavery.
Right.
That was their goal. And in the meantime, a lot of the abolitionists in the North were mill owners. And they were abolitionists because it benefited them financially, because wool was being displaced by wool was being displaced by cotton, and their factories were sitting idle.
Correct.
Because they didn't know, there was no demand for wool. Even in Agawam here, we had feeding hills where the people would come and feed their sheep and everything else. And the wool industry was so great in this region. That's what brought John Brown here. John Brown was a wool salesman from Ohio.
Correct.
And he come here to try and sell, the wool that was generated in Ohio here in Massachusetts to the mill owners. And then, I don't know his experiences, but for some reason he ended up getting into the militant arm of the abolitionist movement.
Wow.
And a lot of the black community was thriving, and especially in Northampton, because they were getting, the people were all contributing and giving him a house, and then he would help contribute to get a house for the next black family.
Correct.
But it was mixed race. It was all different people working in the mill, whether they be white, black, or whatever. And it was a big community. And then when they passed the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850, everybody just fled to Canada. So the mill went in, the mill just about closed down. All the houses were abandoned and everything, because they passed the Fugitive Slave Act, and people could come up here without any documents, just find a black person and claim that he was an escaped slave from my brother-in-law. Nobody knew, but to be black was just like, you had to go back and work for free.
That's true. Okay.
So that changed the whole course of history, in Northampton, because many of the blacks, brought with them trades from Africa that were very predominant. Like, people don't realize it. There's a black person that was a slave that was given to Cotton Mather in Salem, Massachusetts, that introduced the vaccination to the Europeans.
Okay.
The Europeans had no idea of the vaccination, and he went around and he taught Cotton Mather how to beat smallpox, or whatever was the was the disease at the time.
You want some water or anything? Yeah.
No, I'm all set.
Okay.
So he taught the people how to do the vaccination, and it was very much opposed because people just couldn't understand it, the timing and everything at that time.
Correct.
So, Cotton Mather went around and they were paying people to get vaccinated, and of course, certain people, they still died. But instead of dying at 99%, they died at 2 or 3%.
Correct.
So you always had these skeptics. But anyways, he taught the Europeans. And, that's something that you got to give his credit to,
Correct.
And, they want to give Eli Whitney, the benefit of inventing the cotton gin, but it was really a slave that worked for cotton, for Eli Whitney that, taught him that they used combs to straighten out the stuff in Africa. When they had cotton or whatever types of crops they grew for fiber in Africa, he taught them, and then they mechanized it. And he got the credit for it.
Of course.
But that's the cotton gin changed history like there's no tomorrow.
It did. It changed history to the point where the slaves were set free because really there was no need. I remember.
Yep.
So let me ask you a question. What about the Tuskegee experiment? Are you familiar with that when they were injecting the blacks with chlamydia?
Yeah, I'm familiar. It's we do terrible things to people for all the wrong reasons. I mean, there's no explanation to, that it's hard to believe our government does things like that, but we like to think our government all wears a white hat.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, you have Lord Amherst that poisoned the Indians with the smallpox blankets right here in Amherst, Massachusetts.
Yep.
You got the people from South Deerfield. They got angry at the Pequot Indians for selling furs to the Dutch. 1630, they went down and they beheaded 508 women and children that were alone in the Indian village and lit it on fire. They put a bounty on the Pequot men's heads and they would chop their heads off and bring them to South Deerfield and turn them in for the money. The bounty hunters went as far as Pennsylvania and they attacked the Quakers that were hiding the Indians in their barns. And even to this day, you have the Pequot Indians that, they resemble African Americans because all the Pequot men were killed. And the Pequot Indians that survived the initial attack, that they could round up, I'm sure, in every case of genocide, they always miss a few people.
Correct.
We have genocide going back thousands and thousands of years, but every genocide misses a few people.
Yeah. How did Hitler get away, right?
Yeah. But the thing is the children and the women that they could round up that were Pequots, they loaded them on a ship and they sold them as slaves in Trinidad.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the only men they had available to them were African Americans.
Yes.
Because, the British wouldn't deal with an Indian. It was like, whatever.
Faux pas.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that was, so that's how they end up looking like African Americans. How they come back from Trinidad, was another part of the history that I haven't read about.
Okay.
But somehow they must have returned to their native land and they decided to make a casino.
And they're getting every penny back now. And then some.
And they deserve it.
Exactly. Nice. All right. So more about Black history. There's a couple of fables going around that Andrew Jackson was really a black man and that Lincoln had black children.
Well, men are men, and you get a beautiful woman and it seems to cross the color line, whether they want to admit it or not.
It's the truth. Okay. So.
I mean, I see a beautiful girl walking by the window here. I'm a dirty old man and I stick my head out the window and I don't care what color she is.
Are you trying to say our president was a dirty old man?
No, he was young when he had the kids.
So true. Okay. All right.
But I mean, you can't pass laws against nature.
That's true. All right. So we're going to say that Abraham Lincoln did have black children. All right. Now what about Andrew Jackson? I mean, he even has a name, Andrew and Jackson.
No idea. I mean, that's way out of my league.
Okay. Yeah. So
but I mean, does it make a difference?
It doesn't.
You judge your guy on his morality, not on, not by who his wife is and who his girlfriend is, or.
Correct. So true. What else about Black history do you want to tell us? Because I mean, you filled my ear with so much. I'm excited to hear about this.
Well, I just think we're missing an opportunity by not documenting.
That's right.
The church on Hancock Street. That's my biggest ambition. Someday I want to go tour the church.
Well, what I told my brother is I promised you we would go get a picture for you. And I just happen to know a few people who own that church. So I will see if we can go ahead and take a walk through, maybe tomorrow.
Yep, but it should be documented because
Okay.
it's so historically important.
Okay. All right, I think we're going to do that.
We have a lot of stuff that doesn't mean anything, like we're worried about the clock, downtown Springfield, and these little things that don't mean anything. We got $17 million for a butterfly thing in Forest Park, and we have a jewel right there on Hancock Street
Okay.
that's deteriorating because it's so expensive to maintain these buildings.
Yes. Okay. All right, so you also want to talk about a court case that you have currently going on. Now, you don't have to go into as much detail as you would like, but we would like to hear about that.
Well, I'm concerned that the city does these RFPs, and most people don't know what an RFP is.
Yeah.
Instead of auctioning it off to anybody that offers the highest bid, you have to put a bid in, and they decide if they like your idea for the building, and if it's going to benefit the neighborhood. And they're giving it. It seems to be that certain people seem to get every RFP. And when you look at, many of the RFPs and they go to these different corporations, when you track the corporation back, it always seems to have the same owners of the corporations. I don't want to mention any names and get into a pissing match. But, if you look at the records, most of the RFPs are just a waste of money because, we have homeless people sitting underneath the bridges and everything else, and can't pay their rent, and we have millions of dollars that they appropriated to take and convert these things into housing, and they're sitting vacant for years and years and years.
Right.
And nobody knows where the money is gone.
Correct.
I know for one, the building on the corner of Union and Maple Street, the row houses, they spent several, they appropriated $200,000, but they spent $180,000 or somewhere near that on there. And the building is collapsing, and there's nothing to show for the money.
Okay.
And they gave the money out, and there's no building permits have been issued. And it just makes no sense that these people wouldn't be brought to court. I mean, if you owned a building in the middle of downtown Springfield that was collapsing, you would be in jail.
You would be.
And never mind be in jail, they gave you $150,000 to repair it, and where's the money gone?
That's right.
It's...
Heads would roll.
Yep. But I mean, somebody is connected because they get all of these different properties. They pay almost nothing for them, and they get money to, on top of it.
It's true.
If we own that property, we would be in jail if we let it deteriorate to that point.
You're absolutely right. And so what you're planning to do on Union Street, you want to kind of find out what happened to the money? Well, how does the court case get involved, or what do you...
Well, you have in
suing
Massachusetts, when a city sells a piece of property below market value. Okay, the one I chose was the one on the where they built the atomic bomb in Springfield over by Boilard Lumber.
Yep.
Okay, that was the bomb they dropped on Hiroshima. That was part of that project. So that property was contaminated with radiation for many years because when they built the bomb, they were unaware of the dangers of the uranium and the radioactivity and everything. So it sat vacant for a number of years, and the radioactive dust was blowing around the neighborhood, giving people lung cancer, whatever radioactive dust does. So recently, in the last 5 or 6 years, I don't know who was the president at the time, but they bit the bullet and they brought in a bunch of fill and they capped it off and they put dirt over it to make a layer to prevent the radiation, to keep it entrapped from hurting people. Okay, so then people can't live there. So they put it out for a bid, and it was appraised for several $1 million. It was 26 acres, and they run it through a fast track, and I feel that they misrepresented the condition of the property to the people that wanted to bid on it, but they sold the whole 26 acres of land for $10,000 or $15,000 to somebody, the same person with all of these other 8 RFPs. And he bought that, and he's getting millions and millions of dollars in rents from United Energy for the solar farm. And the solar farm was harder to build than most solar farms because they're not allowed to penetrate the dirt. Like a normal solar farm will drill a hole, put a post in to support the solar panels. The solar panels over there are ballasted, so the wind can't blow them over because of the radiation. They can't dig any holes there. So it was a tricky situation. It was an engineering, not a dilemma, nothing that can't be overcome. But it was not an ordinary situation for the solar farm people. But he ended up putting this project together in almost record time, faster than your eyes can battle. And I see that they tricked some of the councilors when they voted to sell the land. Bud Williams was a city councilor at the time,
Yep.
and he questioned the fact that why was it such an emergency to sell it. They had to sign this paper without doing any research, and they come up. Whoever was proposing this said, "You only have 30 days, or we're going to lose the deal. The window's going to close and everything." And they misrepresented, because you can see the comments when you pull up the record of the public meeting, not the public meeting, but the city council meeting where they discussed this. Bud Williams mentions several times about the land being contaminated and that there was no choice, but the people that were doing that didn't represent to the city council that the land had been remediated, that they spent like $100 million or whatever they spent on it to encapsulate this radiation.
Mm-hmm.
So they tricked the city council into signing off on it. And they're supposed to, by law, there's section 30, when they do when they sell any property, regardless of what it is, for less than the value, they have to fill out this form and explain their reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
And the city refuses to explain why they gave them a $2 million piece of land for $10,000. And we went to court. They tried to have it dismissed because they said we didn't have any standing. But if the city got a fair price for that land, we could have bought school books. You
Right.
could have built houses for people.
Right.
You could have, they could have done many things with if they sold that land at a fair price.
Well, it sounds like someone knew someone that knew someone.
Well, I'm just curious that how come it's always the same people that get these bids when they do an RFP and it comes in way below what it should be. How come these people get it and the properties are still vacant years and years later?
Because they take it and they resell it.
We have the building on Maple Street that was like the museum. I know people that were there. It was like the museum when the city took it over. Then they had an RFP, and people that I know bid on it. Their bids somehow didn't get considered, or got lost or something. For some reason, they didn't get considered. And I know several people. I don't want to mention their names on the radio, but they, their place went over there and they actually submitted a bid, but it never got considered. And they sold a building that had a $2.1 million mortgage on it just several months before for $10,000. Wouldn't you like to buy a $2 million building for $10,000? Even if I didn't have it, I'd borrow it from somebody.
We'll start a fundraising campaign, right?
Yeah, but then they gave him, according to the records, I don't know how much of this he was able to collect, but they gave him money for facade improvement. They gave him money for different things. They gave him a $1.5 million tax credit.
When you say they, the government.
The government, different groups. The IRS and the city council and, these people, I don't want to use that, but, they give out these, facade improvement programs, which is money donated by corporations.
Right.
And they're constantly getting this money, but the building is 10 years later and it's still vacant. We have homeless people on the streets. And why, where did this money go? Was it really spent? If it isn't spent, where is it now? Whose bank account is it sitting in? It's accruing interest somewheres.
That's right. And if you follow the money, you'll know exactly
if it isn't spent and it was appropriated, where is it?
Correct. Well, like we always say, follow the money.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
But the guy's got there's $1 million, a $2 million building. He bought it for $10,000. The city gave him money or appropriated money, because when you talk to the city, they won't tell you, if the checks were paid, if they spent any money, if they did anything. It's so hard because, every department has their own checkbook.
That's right.
So, then it's community development money, and then it's, this money and economic rehabilitation money.
Right.
But the bottom line is they had legitimate bidders that were interested in converting that building, getting it back on the tax rolls, providing economical and affordable housing to people, and it's 10 years and the building is still sitting vacant. And where did the money go?
Interesting.
You know, and it's the same people that get these RFPs. You know, the person I'm thinking of when I Googled them with the Secretary of State, they own 10 or 15 corporations in Springfield, and many of them have received RFPs. And, you know, I think, you know, when they submit this to the city councilors, they're tricked because, you know, when they see a different corporation, they don't realize the same people are getting the same. It's the same group of individuals with all of the properties.
Correct. Correct. They don't even live anywhere in this area.
Yeah, it's not even if they live here. I mean, you get a property and they give it to you at a discount, and they give you federal money or tax credits or whatever to fix it up. You should get it back into production and housing people in a reasonable length of time. And 10 years is not reasonable.
And within 10 years, how many homeless people are being accrued on the street, right? So, where are you at right now with this entire court situation?
We just filed some papers there, you know, asking for more information.
You said your attorney and yourself?
Well, I did it myself.
Okay.
And, you know, because there's no money to be made.
Correct.
You know, you can't sue the city and collect any money. All you can sue them is to try and obey the law.
Correct.
And, you know, for some reason they refuse to obey the law. You know, they don't want to admit why they gave it to this guy at a fraction of what it's worth.
And what is your connection to the homeless? Because you have mentioned that several times, for the homeless on Union Street in different areas downtown Springfield.
Well, the homelessness and the high rents are our biggest problem in Massachusetts.
That's right.
You know, you take somebody like Smith & Wesson. They're a tremendous, very valuable, honest company. They pay fair wages. But at the end of the day, you know, their workers are making $1,000 a week and they can't afford to live in Springfield.
They can't.
You know, my street there, they're getting $1,500, $1,600 a month rents.
And that's not a high income area over there.
No,
right?
But I'm just saying, you know, you can't pay a guy making $1,000 a week. $22 an hour is $1,000 a week.
$22.50 to be exact.
Okay. Is that what it is?
Yes, I used to make that.
Okay, so, you know, what do you take home at the end of that?
So
700, 800?
Yeah, about 700. If you have children, you're lucky to have about 8 kids. You get about 800.
Okay, so now you got $500 a week for your rent.
Correct.
Okay, then you got, you know, heaven forbid you got to feed them. It's one thing with these kids. You feed them every day, and then it gets to be 2 and 3 times a day. You just can't stop them.
Who thought of this? Jeez.
I know.
Right. Hence, where is the storehouse, right? Because we're looking for who's going to feed these kids, right?
Yeah, and then, you know, they don't have, you know, the cable TV is $125, which I don't understand. You know, something that's been paid for 100 times over. You know, I don't understand how it can be so much money.
The Wi-Fi is the most needed. Now, we were at a time, as you remember, we didn't have Wi-Fi. We had dial-up, right? And everybody had to wait to use computer.
Yep.
And that was only, what, $30 a month from AT&T? You remember? Yep. And now we have Wi-Fi. And
but, you know, now they don't offer you Wi-Fi unless you buy all these other packages.
Correct. Well, this is how they get you. They get you with the package first, $89 with Wi-Fi included. And then when you get the first month bill, it's about $162 a month from now on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nice. Okay.
But I mean, you know, it's a monopoly. And you know, you can't blame Xfinity for the whole thing.
Right.
Because I was in shock a few years ago with, they tried suing Comcast because Comcast didn't spend enough money on photographing the city council meetings and everything else. Because they make them walk around and do these city tours.
Yep.
And then they make them run some kind of there's a media center that they have to run, and they have to hire school teachers or whatever.
I think it's Mass Hire. Are you talking about Mass Hire?
No, they,
Mass.
There's a lot of stuff that the city requires from Xfinity that has nothing to do with the cable.
I understand.
You know, it's just like, you can sell bananas for 15 cents a pound. I'm going to give you a license, but you got to hire a cop at $80 an hour to watch the bananas.
Correct.
you know.
Yep.
So we're not charging them, you know, we're not charging you for the cop. But you know, at the end of the day, they got to get the money to pay for these things that they're requiring.
Right.
You know, they require, you know, free internet for the schools. They require, you know, them to do these, you know, we don't even know. I was in shock, you know, that they were suing, you know, Comcast for, you know, some astronomical sum of money because they didn't have so many city council meetings and they didn't spend the money that they appropriated. And I says, that's so foolish. A guy goes over there and he bids on doing your tires on your car, putting brakes on your car, and he figures it's going to take 2 hours, so he charges you $150. And then he gets it done in 1 hour and 45 minutes. You know, you don't go over there and you say, I want $35 back. Because if it took him 3 hours, you would still pay him the same amount of money.
All right, Ron, I want to say thank you so much. I mean, we've already taken so much of your time. And we're excited about Black History Month. So we just want to know, you know, what can we do for you?
Save me a copy when you videograph the inside of the church.
Done. Thank you.
Take it easy.
All right.